Well, good morning. Oh, all right, come on. Good morning. Welcome to Center Church. Glad that you guys could make it. My name is Marcus. I'm the lead pastor around here. Wasn't the worship team really awesome today? And in particular, I got to brag on somebody. Jeremiah Pontaneras, who led the first song today. Love that guy. And I have what I call follicle envy. He has such a luscious head of hair, and the Bible says to covet the best gifts, and bald guys, when you see a really nice head of hair, you just go, you know what, mad respect for that. But anyway, welcome to week number 1 of a brand new series that we are starting today called Follow Me, Making the World Better and Brighter. And we're going to be looking at 2 of the most powerful words that Jesus ever said. Follow me. And we're going to kind of dig into those 2 words over the course of the next 4 weeks. We're coordinating our weekend talks and content with our small groups that are launching this week as well. So there's discussion that's going to be happening during the week, on the weekend. It's just going to be a great time over the next month. I hope you can be here with us as we jump into these 2 really powerful words. We've all had somebody invite us at some point to follow us someplace. And if you've been around any decent amount of time, you've also had the occasion of being invited to follow somebody, and then after you followed them, you regretted having gone. Anybody with me on that? It's like, I thought that was a good idea. Turns out it was a terrible idea. When my senior year in high school, I followed a buddy of mine into a place that I kind of wish that I would not have followed him, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. Friday night, the feeling's right, and he invited me to join him and his buddy who had just gotten a brand new and kind of souped up Ford Mustang. And so I'm like, sure, what could go wrong? And I went and got in the car along with 5 other guys. I'm crammed in the back seat of this car in between 2 other knuckleheads, and the 6 of us, all 18 years old, go out for a joyride in the brand new Ford Mustang. Now, you can imagine, what could go wrong with 6 teenage boys in a Ford Mustang on a Friday night? Am I right? And so, sure enough, we're on the interstate. Who ends up coming up next to us? Another friend who had a really fast car, and we end up drag racing on the interstate at like 1 in the morning on early on a Saturday morning, I guess at that point. And I remember sitting in the backseat wedged behind these 2 knucklehead guys going, I have followed the wrong guy into this place as we hurtled down the freeway at 140 miles an hour. I was terrified. And I actually thought to myself, this is the dumbest decision I've ever made. It'll be the last dumb decision that I ever made because we're about to die. I've also had the really awesome experience of following the right person into a really cool experience. When Jen and I were first married, we went to Hawaii, and we went on a horseback ride, just the 2 of us and a guide, a trail guide. And this guy really knew what he was doing, and he took us kind of deep into the interior in these spaces that looked like nobody had ever gone before, and it was this wonderful experience. At one point, he actually stopped and said, I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. I want to show you something. And so he went back into the jungle area. We didn't see him for a couple of minutes. He comes back out of the bushes, literally, with fresh coconut and fresh passion fruit and pineapple. All this fresh fruit that he went back and picked probably off some other dude's tree. And then comes back, and it was like, wow, it's amazing. And he's like, well, that's even not the biggest deal. A little bit further down the trail. So another couple of 100 yards down the trail, we emerge onto this black sand beach. There isn't another person around at all. In fact, it's so secluded, there aren't any human footprints on the sand at all. It was like we were the first people to ever see this place. And I remember thinking to myself as I'm macking on fresh coconut and passion fruit and all these other things on a black sand beach with the love of my life going, I have followed the right guy to the right place. There's something awesome. Yeah, There's something awesome about following the right guy into the right place. And that's what this series is really all about. It's following the invitation of Jesus, and 2 of the most powerful things that he ever said to us. Just come and follow me. And it's an invitation to value people. That's what we're really going to be talking about today. And so I want to draw our attention to the story. It's really the first time Jesus ever said these two words to anybody. It's found in Matthew chapter 4 at verse 18. It says, walking along the beach of the lake of Galilee, Jesus saw two brothers, Simon, later called Peter, and Andrew. They were fishing, throwing their nets into the lake. It was their regular work. And Jesus said to them, come with me, follow me. I'll make a new kind of fisherman out of you. I'll show you how to catch men and women instead of perch and bass. Now, they didn't ask questions. They simply dropped their nets and followed. A short distance down the beach, they came to another pair of brothers, James and John, Zebedee's sons. These two were sitting in a boat with their father, Zebedee, mending their fish nets. Jesus made the same offer to them. Follow me. And they were just as quick to follow, abandoning boat and father. Now, there's a few things that I want us to gather kind of as foundational truths right out of the gate here about who Jesus is and how he operates. There's sort of the premise that this invitation to follow me is really built on. And you can jot a few of these down. The first one is that Jesus finds people right where they are. That's where he goes looking for people. He goes into their environment. He doesn't wait for them to come to him. So these guys are fishermen, and they're literally in their boats, okay? And he goes and he meets them there on the seashore. He doesn't wait for them to come to him. And I think it's so key that we understand this kind of about the character of who Jesus is that Jesus isn't sitting sort of up in some high tower in some sort of religious, office complex doing spiritual paperwork, okay? That's not who Jesus is. He's not waiting for somebody to come and ring his doorbell. He actually proactively goes to where people are. Jesus finds people at the beach. He's a San Diegan at heart, okay? He goes to where they are and seeks them out. The next one is that Jesus is looking for men and women who are willing to follow him. He's looking for willing people. He's not looking for people who are sort of begrudgingly doing it. They're doing it out of obligation. They're feeling pushed into it. He's looking for people who are willing to follow him. That's who he's wanting. So I want you to turn to your neighbor right now. Just look at him in the face and just say, Jesus wants you. Ready? Go for it. Go do it. Jesus wants you. Yeah. What's important to understand is that Jesus isn't a bully. He's not bullying people into submission. He's looking for people who willingly want to respond to him. And then next, thirdly, when we follow Jesus, the search for our significance is over. What he's saying is, come follow me, and I'm going to show you how to really live. I'm not going to should on you with a bunch of to-dos. I'm just going to show you what's really valuable about life. What you really hope for in significance just came into reality because you're with me. And that's exactly what it would mean for these fishermen that he's talking to at the seashore. Really, literally from that moment that they dropped their nets and started following Jesus, what they discovered in that moment was a life of significance was about to begin. They were getting ready to go on the absolute adventure of their life. They were going to experience love and joy in a level that they'd never known. They were going to experience the power of God working in their life and through their life in a way they had never experienced before. Their search for something significant was over the moment Jesus walked up and said, hey, come follow me. Pretty amazing thing. But I want you to think about this. Jesus has this encounter not just like with one pair of guys that then drop their nets and go and follow him. It's actually two different groups of guys that do the exact same thing, same invitation, who drop their primary source of income and go and follow Jesus. Does that seem odd to you? Like, it's just like, why would somebody do that? I want you to think about yourself in your place of work. Some guy named Jesus shows up at your place of work, and he's like, hey, follow me. And you're like, okay, makes sense to me. Let's do it. 401k, what? Who cares? Let's go for it. It is a little bit odd, and I want to I was getting kind of into this a little bit this past week and going like, I wonder what was it that would cause these guys to drop everything that they were doing and go with Jesus straight away? Well, I mean, was it his reputation? Like he was already known to be this like amazing, teacher or like crazy stuff going on, like, and I just got to go get with that? And I'm thinking it's doubtful because at this stage in the game of Jesus' ministry, he really hadn't done a whole bunch that would make him a person that was all that famous in the area. It's probably not that. Was it just because the actual invitation was so compelling? Maybe. But as I got to think about it, and I started thinking about other times that Jesus encountered other people in the Gospels, I think it's actually something a lot deeper. I actually think that there was something about how Jesus handled himself, his demeanor, the way he smiled, the way that his body language, the way he communicated, that just conveyed in no uncertain terms, I really value you. And when somebody really values you, it's compelling. It changes the way that you might normally be defensive. Now all of a sudden, I'm open-hearted because the person that's talking to me is basically saying with every fiber of their being, you're really important to me. I value you. That's what Jesus was saying with his very words when he said, come and follow me. That's what Jesus, that's like at the DNA level of who Jesus is. That's what he's saying about people. You're important to me. And I think that there's a few questions that any of us would reasonably ask if we're ever confronted with the opportunity to follow somebody else. And I jotted a couple of these things down. These are questions that we ask before we follow. The first one is, do you care for me? Do you care about me? We want to know, does this person actually have my best interest at heart? You give a rip. The second one is, can you help me? Like, can you make a difference in my life right now? Like with what I'm going through, are you the person that can help make my life better and brighter? Because I could use some help. Can you meet the needs that matter the most to me? And then here's the third question is, can I trust you? If I follow you, are you going to be true to your word? You're going to do what you say? You're going to be faithful and follow through? When you make a promise, are you going to deliver? And here's what Jesus not only was saying at the very beginning of his ministry as he started beginning to call people to follow him, you actually see it all throughout the course of his ministry here on earth. When he engaged with people, the answer to those three questions in Christ was always yes. Yes, you care for me. Yes, you can help me. Yes, I can trust you. It's actually somebody that engenders a sense of real consistency and dependability. That's who Jesus really was. And so he valued people. And whenever you look through the life of Christ throughout the Gospels, I'm going to give you a few examples that I just kind of cherry-picked here that show you examples of how Jesus actually operated with people. And it's not that he just operated with them a long, long time ago. This is actually part of the heart of God, how he still operates with you and me. These things that he values about you and me to this very day, that give us a sense of confidence to walk toward him in this invitation, follow me. I want to look at the life of a man named Zacchaeus. It's found in Luke chapter 19. We're going to kind of take a quick survey through the Gospels here real quick. Look at what this encounter that Jesus had with Zacchaeus. It says, then Jesus entered and walked through Jericho. There was a man there. His name was Zacchaeus, the head tax man and quite rich. And he wanted desperately to see Jesus, but the crowd was in his way. He was a short man and he couldn't see over the crowd. Zacchaeus has little man's disease, okay? It says, so he ran on ahead and climbed up in a sycamore tree so that he could see Jesus when he came by. Are you getting the idea? Little man's disease has climbed to the top of a tree so that he can overlook. He is now spectating upon Jesus as he walks by. And in verse 5, it says, when Jesus got to the tree, now he looks up into the tree and says, Zacchaeus, hurry down. Today is my day to be a guest in your home. He just invited himself over for dinner. And so Zacchaeus scrambled out of the tree, hardly believing his good luck, delighted to take Jesus home with him. And everyone who saw the incident was indignant. Why are they indignant? Well, because he's a tax man and he's ultra wealthy. He's ultra wealthy because he basically had been cheating people out of his taxes. Now, pretty much in any day and age and in any culture, when you introduce yourself at the party as, hey, how you doing? I'm your friendly neighborhood IRS tax agent. That's a great way to be a chilling effect on the party, okay? And that's basically what Zacchaeus was. And so all these people see the incident and says they grump, what business does he have getting cozy with this crook? Zacchaeus just stood there a little stunned. And he stammered apologetically. He feels guilty. Master, I gave away half my income to the poor, and if I'm caught cheating, I pay 4 times the damages. I'm guilty. And Jesus says, today is salvation day in this home. Here he is, Zacchaeus, son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to find and restore the lost. Now, I want to take a quick look at how Jesus saw the value of Zacchaeus. I don't want you to miss this, and it's how he sees the value of you and me. Number one, Jesus valued him because he was lost and needed restoring. In fact, that last little verse in verse 10 says that the whole reason Jesus even showed up was to find stuff that was lost and then restore it. Okay? And that's exactly why he came. That's exactly why you're valuable to God. Because at some point, you have been lost. You might even be walking in the door today going, man, I kind of feel like that way right now. At some point in your life, you had a bunch of grime and junk on your life that needed restoring. You needed to be polished up. You had tons of dents in the fender. You may have walked in today feeling exactly that way here today. And I want you to know, you're in a great place. You belong here. You know why? Because Jesus digs and he really values going after people who are lost and who need to be restored. He's that way to this very day. But look at Zacchaeus again. Jesus valued him more than he even valued himself. Zacchaeus, it says he could hardly even comprehend his good luck. He's like, man, how did I luck out to have Jesus come to my house? You know why? Because he didn't feel worthy to even have Jesus come to his house. He thought less of himself than even Jesus did. Jesus saw tremendous value in him. And then thirdly, Jesus valued him more than others valued Zacchaeus. Okay? Everybody else is looking around and grumping and pointing their finger and basically like, why is Jesus getting all cozy with this crook? Because this crook isn't worth Jesus' time. And Jesus stops and says, wait, time out. Come on down, bro. Today is salvation day. I'm coming to your house. He valued him more than anybody else valued him. It's so important that we understand that about who Jesus is when he says, hey, come and follow me. Because I value stuff that's lost and needs restoring. I value you more than you value yourself. I value you way more than anybody else that's looking around at you and putting a price tag on you. The value I place on you is actually incalculable worth. It is priceless beyond any calculation. God values you. Look at another example. It's the example of the Samaritan woman in John chapter 4. And in verse 7, it says, a woman, a Samaritan, came to draw water. She's at this well. And Jesus is there, and he says, would you give me a drink of water? Now, it says that his disciples had gone to the village to buy food for lunch. So Jesus is just there one-on-one with this Samaritan woman. And it says that the Samaritan woman was taken aback and asked, how come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? Because Jews in those days wouldn't be caught dead talking to Samaritans. But just then, his disciples came back from town. They've been out, and they've already cruised through Jack in the Box, and they're bringing back food. And it says that they were shocked. They couldn't believe that he was talking with that kind of woman. They can't believe that he was talking with that kind of woman. That's what he's saying. And it says that no one said what they were all thinking, but their faces showed it. I've seen those faces before. Have you? No, they're not saying, but they're saying. You know what I'm saying? And that's what was going on. The faces of self-righteous people who are just shocked by someone else's low estate. They're just appalled that somebody else would have made that bad decision. Now, they're perfect, of course. They make no mistakes. They're sinless perfection. It's everybody else that they're just shocked that that would happen. And I want you to see how Jesus instead viewed this Samaritan woman. The first one is that Jesus valued her because she was far from God. He valued her because she was far from God. As a Samaritan woman, just so you kind of understand the context here a little bit, she basically couldn't have gotten in a lower estate in that culture than where she was. Okay? As a Samaritan, she suffered a tremendous amount of racial discrimination because of her ethnicity. Because of the sexism of the day, as a Samaritan woman, she was seen as even lower in estate. And to add insult to all of that genetic and gender injury, what she had done in her behavior as someone who was an adulteress, who had had lots of different relationships with lots of different guys, she was considered trash in her town. She's got a lot of things that are going wrong for her. It's exactly the kind of person that any other Jewish man would have been way too good to ever have a conversation with. And here's Jesus sitting down at a well saying, "Hey, can I have a drink of water?" And she's completely shocked. Jesus valued her because she was far from God. What I love is that when you're with Jesus, bigotry doesn't stand a chance. When you're with Jesus, sexism doesn't stand a chance. When you're with Jesus, my sinful past and all the decisions that maybe everybody else says, shame on you, shame on you, shame on you, doesn't stand a chance when I'm with Him. I love that about Him. And the same God that said it to that woman at the well so many years ago says it still to people like me, says it still to people like you. The next one was that Jesus valued her more than she valued herself, again, because she couldn't even believe that He was even talking to her, let alone valuing her. And Jesus valued her more than the disciples valued her. They couldn't believe that He was talking to that kind of woman. Do you remember a few years ago, they were like really popular there for a while, the WWJD bracelets, What Would Jesus Do bracelets? Anybody remember those things? Maybe even had them? WWJD. And like everything turned into a hashtag WWJD. Here's what I want you to see. You know the guys that are wearing the WWJD bracelets? They're called disciples. They got them early on. They were the guys that got them at the boat. Okay? Jesus said, follow me. They all got WWJD bracelets. It's like, oh, we're just going to go find out what would Jesus do in this situation. These are the guys that completely missed what Jesus would do. They're consistently, folks that are wearing around WWJD bracelets consistently miss what Jesus would do. For whatever reason. It's like part of the human condition. We get all bound up by our own concepts and our own self-righteousness and our own judgment, and we look down our nose at other people. And what Jesus would do is oftentimes a pretty challenging question, because what Jesus does is often real surprising. What Jesus would do is almost always different than what my knee-jerk reaction might be in the circumstance. See, Jesus values people. He values them, those that are far from Him. He values even more than they value themselves. He values people more than what your initial reaction and my initial reaction may or may not be. Jesus just values people like crazy. That's what He exudes from His every pore, His every smile, His every facial expression, His every word, all His body language. It just says, you are an incredibly masterful work of art. I made you, I love you, I dig you, you're my kid, you belong to me, I value you. That's the heart of Jesus. And I want you to hear, coming and walking in today, if you don't have a relationship with that Jesus, He's the same God that comes and sits down and looks you square in the eye and just says, doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter how lowly you view yourself, doesn't matter what other people might say about you, I value you. Look at one more example, the prodigal son, the story in Luke chapter 15. Jesus shares this really powerful illustration. You may have heard this illustration before, but the idea of the prodigal son is that he had gone to his father and requested his inheritance, which was a shameful thing to do, a disrespectful thing to do to his dad. But he took all his money and ran. And he went and he squandered it all, spending every dime on loose living and his own agenda, his own selfishness. He's spent it all. Finally coming to a place where he's completely penniless. He's in desperate straits. He's broken, he's lost, he's starving. He finally kind of comes to his senses sitting on Skid Row. And Jesus goes on to tell the rest of the story. In verse 20, it says that this lost prodigal son got right up and went home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. His heart pounding, the father ran out and embraced him and kissed him. And then the son started his speech. Now, I like how we say this. He says he started his speech. What we can gather from this is that the son had started preparing his thoughts, his sort of pitch to his father. Like, I've really blown it. I've offended my dad, but I need to come back. I'm penniless. I'm broken. I'm lost. Maybe I'll prepare my speech and maybe dad will let me live in the garage. And so he gets ready and he begins his speech. Look at what he says. He says, Father, I've sinned against God. I've sinned before you. I don't deserve to be called your son ever again. But look at verse 32. I love this. It says, but the father wasn't listening. The father wasn't listening. He was calling to the servants already. Quick, bring a clean set of clothes and dress him. Put the family ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then get a grain-fed heifer and roast it. We're having a barbecue, he says. We're going to feast. We're going to have a wonderful time. My son is here, given up for dead and now alive, given up for lost and now found. And they began to have a wonderful time. See, but what was going on is that there was another brother that was in the picture, and he was there all along. And so he sees the bad son, the black sheep of the family, come on back in, and he's not all that happy about it. And in verse 28, it says that the older brother stalked off in an angry sulk and refused to join in. He's having a pity party. And his father came out and tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. And the son said, look, how many years have I stayed here serving you, never giving you one moment of grief? But have you ever thrown me a party? You never thrown a party for me and my friends. So then this son of yours, who has thrown away your money on whores, shows up and you go all out with the feast. And his father said, son, you don't understand. You're with me all the time, and everything that is mine is yours. But this is a wonderful time, and we had to celebrate. This brother of yours was dead, and he's alive now. He was lost, and now he's found. I want you to see the value that God places on prodigal children, on the prodigal son. First, the father valued the son more than the son valued himself. Do you notice the consistency in all of these stories? It's part of our condition a lot of times when we find ourselves in a pit, we value ourselves far lower than God values us. He said, I don't even deserve to be called your son. But one of my favorite part of the whole story is that the father wasn't listening. I love that. I'm griping to him about how I'm not worth it and how I don't deserve it. He's not even listening. He's already calling for the barbecue. He's already putting people in place to have the celebration. He's already making it happen. You know why? Because the first response of the father seeing his son coming, which, by the way, it says that he saw him coming from a long way off, which meant that the father was waiting with bated breath with the binoculars, looking out the window. He wasn't just going on with his business. He's waiting for his son to return. And a long way off, son starts coming back, and his heart pounding, running out to make it happen. He doesn't send shame on his son. He sets forward a celebration for his son. So for some of us, that's so different than our view of God. We think for sure, maybe I can get a spot in the garage, but there's no way God's throwing a celebration party for me. He's got to be disappointed. And you've missed how God values people. He's running out to grab you when you make that half turn back toward him. He's setting loose the celebration to make it happen. He doesn't look at the son and say, I told you so. He's not shaming people. He's celebrating people who return to him. Next, the father valued his son more than the brother did. That's obvious. See, what was going on is the brother is the legalist. The brother is the one with all the boxes that he's checking, all the things that he does that he should be getting extra credit for. And isn't it interesting that the brother even tells the father, you know, that son of yours, he's not only putting down the son, he's putting down the father. He's completely separating himself, like the same sort of sinful DNA isn't pumping through his veins like it is through his brothers. Say, he's got the same issues, but in his self-righteousness, he has dared to put down somebody else and elevate his own self. And what the father was coming in and trying to articulate is, no, I actually value my lost son far more than the brother does. I got to be honest with you, as I've been a pastor now for a long time. I've been around lots of different kinds of churches and lots of different types of Christians. Probably you have too. I find it so amazing that some of the most judgmental people can actually be within our own family. You know, that son of yours over there, I'm awesome, but they got issues. And if you would actually get the clue like how awesome I have been, you really should have been throwing a party for me the whole time because I'm so great. Do you notice how easy it is for us to get self-righteous and sort of judgmental on other people? You know what I recognize is that I do that. You do that. And the call from Jesus that says, you know what, come follow me, come value people the way I do, kind of changes the way that I see other people and the way that I operate in my life, if I'll let it. Here's the last one. The father valued his son because he belonged to him. Okay? The son was valuable because he was the father's son. End of story. And I want you to know that about how the Heavenly Father sees you as his kid. Sonship and daughtership, being a child of God, can never be rescinded. God sees it as an identity for you. You belong to him. The Lord values people. And so what happens is when we have been called to follow Jesus the same way, you can't follow Jesus without following also after what he values. You can't value a relationship with God without also valuing what he values. And he values people. And so what I thought we would do, I felt challenged this week as I looked through this, and I was reminded again at just how passionate the value of Jesus is. The whole reason he came was to seek and save lost people. And how I felt personally challenged to take another look at what motivates me and how I see people. Because I recognize I can't value a relationship with God without also valuing what he values. And so I want to leave you with a few challenges here. There are ways that we can walk out and operate this Monday differently than the way we operated last Monday. There's sort of commitments and choices that we can make to value people differently this week. Here's the first one. Would you join me in this? I will unconditionally love people because God loved me that way. That's a decision that I can make today, going into my Monday, that just says, you know what, I'm going to unconditionally love people this week because God loved me that way. You listen to me. If you're a follower of Christ, listen to me very, very carefully. You cannot value your relationship with God if you do not value what God values, and he values people. Don't fool yourself. Now, we fool ourselves all the time. In fact, church history, human history is full of people who out of one side of their mouth said, I value God, and out of the other side of their mouth condemn people. You can't do it. That's not how God operates. To love God is to love people. That is our great commandment from him. Unconditionally loved by God. And because that's true, I will unconditionally love people in return. Here's number 2. I will make it easy to come to Jesus because what people do is never greater than who they belong to. I'm going to make it easy for people to come to Jesus. Because what somebody does or doesn't do is never greater than who they belong to. That means that I'm going to refuse to be an obstacle or a barrier to people coming to Jesus. I'm going to refuse to be the person, whether with words that are coming out of my mouth, or like the disciples that were there with with that Samaritan woman at the well, who basically didn't say anything, but their face said it all, to be an obstacle to people coming. I want to make it easy for people to experience how much God values them. And it's not about what they do or what they don't do. They're valuable just because they're made in the image of God. They're valuable just because Jesus considers them a masterpiece and they belong to Him. They're lost. God sees them as priceless. That needs to change and grow in each of our perspectives, I think, if we're going to follow Jesus. And then here's the third one. I will see people as a treasure to be found. A treasure to be found. Look up here just for a second. People are not bundles of mistakes to be condemned. Let's say that again. People are not just bundles of mistakes to be condemned. They're priceless treasures that are lost and ought to be found and celebrated. The whole reason Jesus came was to seek those things that are lost and to see them restored. My life is a testimony of someone who was found by Jesus and whose life was turned around. You may be sitting here today and you resonate with that. You're like, yeah, that's true for me too. There was a moment when you had an encounter with Jesus, everything changed. You went from being lost to being found. You went from being broken to being restored. You went from just being dark to living in His light. You may have walked in the door today, though, never having experienced that today. And maybe you've just gotten a bunch of obstacles and a bunch of, you've gotten a bunch of shame on you, shame on you, shame on you. And I just want you to know, you belong here because around here we see people as a treasure that need to be found. Our highest goal is that you come into a relationship with the living Christ and can experience from Him that you belong to Him. Romans says that you are among those who have been called to belong to Jesus. They're the reason why He came. And it doesn't matter how deep the pit is that you may find yourself in, He sees you right there. I actually came across a cute little story about a man who fell into a pit and he couldn't get himself out. He's stuck there in the pit. And a subjective person came along and says, I feel for you down there. And an objective person came along and said, it's logical. I just knew someone was going to fall down there eventually. A Christian scientist came along and said, you only think you're in a pit. A Pharisee said, well, only bad people fall into things like that, so that must mean you're the pits. A fundamentalist said, you deserve your pit. A charismatic said, just name your pit and claim that you're not in it anyway. An IRS agent asked him if he had paid his taxes on the pit. The county inspector asked if he had a building permit to dig a pit in the first place. An evasive person came along and, they avoided the subject of the pit altogether. A self-pitying person said, you haven't seen anything until you've seen my pit. An optimist said, things could be worse. A pessimist said, things will get worse. And a realist just said, now that's a pit. But Jesus, seeing the man in the pit, lovingly reached into the pit and lifted the man out of the pit. What's so interesting to me is that we all have different flavors of standing on the outside and making our analysis of the person that's in the pit. When Jesus spends no time doing anything other than going right where the person is and reaching in and lifting them out and transforming a life. And when Jesus says, follow me, what you get ready to follow Him into is the same value system that He operates in. Follow me and value people. You can't follow me if you won't. But when you do, your life will become an agent of bringing light to dark places. Your life will become an agent of seasoning the recipes of people's life from going from bland to being absolutely spectacular. that when we follow him and value people the way he values it, we cannot help but live the life, the adventurous, overcoming, victorious life that Jesus intended for each one of us to have. That our lives will be made better when we help other people win. Would you bow your heads with me? God, help us love people unconditionally, Lord, because you loved us that way. I pray that you'd help us to make it easy for people who are far from you to experience what it means to belong to you, to come close to you, maybe for the first time. I pray that you'd help us to see people not as bundles of mistakes that need to be condemned, but as priceless treasures to be found and celebrated. I pray, God, that you'd help us to respond to the invitation of Jesus. Follow me and value people. That's our desire, Lord. I pray that you'd help us to live into our week this Monday differently than we lived into last Monday. Challenge us, stretch us, give us eyes to see people where they are. Help us to love them where they are and to be agents of your goodness and your grace and your hope in this world that you've placed us in. Help us to lead them toward a relationship with you, to lift them out of the pit. In Jesus' name, amen.